Right, so this is the third of my conversations in celebration of acta35, so 35 years of acta community theatre. I'm Neil Beddoe, I'm the artistic director and founder, and this is Kerrie Schaefer, who, Kerrie, introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, I'm Associate Professor in Drama at the University of Exeter. And before that, I used to lecture at a university in Australia, the University of Newcastle, which has a proud tradition of community development and social change work in performance through the work of David Watt, Associate Professor David Watt, who wrote a lot on UK community theatre, yeah, and Australian practices as well.
So yeah. I didn't know that. Now here's the photograph of you, Kerrie, which I really love. And here, this is you at Fit from the Heart Festival, 2016. Having a great time with, is that Helen from Med Theatre? And yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's from Med Theatre.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is the workshop. But of course, we had met some years before that. I was trying to work it out this morning. I think that we met in 2011.
Yeah, we met when I handed over Ellie to Charlie and I went in to see Huyuman.
Oh, right.
That was the first show that I saw at acta. And I think that's the first time I met you, although we could have met at ICAF as well at 2011, but I can't remember. What came first?
Yeah, but my memory is that you were recommended to me by our mutual friend Eugene van Erven, from Utrecht University, who also coordinates the ICAF in Holland.
Yeah,
and that was when acta was setting up our first international project, and Eugene said you need to get Coast, and he said you ought to talk to Kerrie. She's just down the road from you, he said. And I think that was, but I'd forgotten that you'd come to Huyuman, which was a visiting performance from our Rotterdam cousins, Rotterdam Bay Theatre, of a Somali show. So
because Eugene told me about that. So I met Eugene in 2008 or 9 at Plymouth Mahjong, where David Oddy had his Arrow conference, and Jane Cruz was there and Eugene was there, and he told me about acta then, but I was 6 months pregnant, so it took me another bit of time before I got up to Bristol. So he told me about you, and then I went and saw some work by a Dutch community theatre company in Bristol.
Yeah. That was it. That was a really important event for us, because we learned so much and wound up doing our. It sort of kicked off a whole lot of work we've done since then with the Somali community. So I'm going to take us to one of I think your favourite actor shows. Excuse all the shenanigans with the Zoom here. So. Boom, boom. No. The elders are. This is the favourites of yours, and I always wanted to, to talk to you about, to hear what you thought of the group, and just why you like their work so much, I suppose. In the context, because I mean, obviously you're an expert in applied theatre, just thinking of their work in the context of that field.
I mean, Tiki Piki Boom Boom's an important show for me in lots of ways. I guess it was, I do you remember when I brought into rehearsal the book that I bought for Ellie? And it had my daughter, and it had the stories in it, like the Caribbean kind of stories. And I remember in the rehearsal process, the elders were trying to remember the stories that they were told as kids, or that they might have told their kids, and they were having, yeah, it was a really hard thing to do to remember that far back, and those stories. And I remember I bought in a book, and you didn't want a book in the process, you wanted them to remember.
Purist.
Yeah, and I guess it's because they have an improvised kind of style of performance, and you want to, and they take that into performance. So there's keeping it feeling like it's coming from them in the process of performing. Yeah, so, but I mean, those stories need to be told, don't they? They come from an oral storytelling tradition. So you can read books, but you don't hear the patois or the, you know, the you don't see the kind of bodies performing it, that these bodies who've kind of probably been told the story and then retold it themselves. So what interested me about this performance was the kind of recreation of that sort of probably familial or community sort of storytelling tradition in you know, in the middle of Bristol in schools. So the kind of reproduction, the recreation of that storytelling tradition, oral storytelling tradition, was really important. And it was important for me because Ellie's grandma had died, and she was Jamaican, and you know, we didn't have that for her. So, you know, when I brought Ellie to the show, it was fantastic, and it was just a really fun show. There was interaction, which she loves. She's completely opposite to me. And she, you know, she created the piggy gate, the gate to catch the pig, to catch the snake.
Oh,
So
right.
Tiger could prove his virility as one of the animals, you know, major animals in the jungle. So yeah, you know, it was just a great show, and the singing and the kind of joking, and you know, while this really important kind of transmission of cultural heritage was happening, was it, you know, it really sort of came together.
Yeah, I love the elders because they simultaneously take themselves very seriously and don't take themselves seriously. The stories and the culture, it's so important to them, and making sure that, you know, the different generations hear those stories and understand the world that they grew up in. But at the same time, just as this photo shows, prepare to have a laugh, and there's such joy about the group. I, you know, always loved working with them, and continue to work with them. I think that might be the last. Yes, that is the last one. Yeah, I think that, and your daughter Ellie gave a great interview after seeing Dickie Boom Room, which I think is still up on the actor website. Her impressions, which is how much, some years ago now. Yeah, because I remember, of course, with the elders, when we were doing Tiki Boom Boom, you visited on several occasions, didn't you, and sat in on rehearsal, which is really interesting from my point of view. I think I've said to you on various occasions, the thing with actor is that for so many years I just felt like I was operating in a complete bubble, and work as a company was just happening in Bristol, nothing else like it was happening anywhere else. One of the things that made me realise that we were just part of a movement, and a larger thing was meeting you and having the benefit of your experience and knowledge as to the, you know, what was happening in the world of community theatre.
Yeah, I come from a kind of different. One of the things that I found sort of interesting and also a bit difficult is that there are very different and distinct traditions of, I guess, community-based practice. And I was more familiar with the Australian one, but also the American one. So you know, when Jan Cohen Cruise's book Local Acts was written, we started calling what Dave and I were kind of doing big projects in Australia back then. We started not calling it community cultural development, but community-based performance, or a combination of both, performance-based community cultural development. We were kind of mucking around with terminology, but I wasn't really, I mean, also I was more aware of, say, the work of Banner Theatre in the UK, because Dave had written a book with Alan Fileward from Canada on Banner. It's called Workers' Playtime. It's a great book, but I was kind of aware of that political tradition of community theatre, but less aware of, you know, other sort of styles of community theatre, because I think people stopped writing about it in about the 90s, the early 90s, and then it kind of became something else. It became applied drama, but that's, you know, I would kind of argue that's a slightly different practice to what we see at ICAF, although these are just names, I think, and there are variations between practices, but, you know, I wouldn't want to separate them, because I think at the minute, the more we all stick together, the better we'll be. So
Yeah,
applied, community, socially engaged, whatever you want to call it.
in the end, it's about encouraging or telling people stories through the medium of theatre, and people who don't normally have the opportunity to do that. Here's another group, sort of heritage project here. This is from Gas Girls, which I know again is a project that, I mean, certainly I think it's one of the best pieces acta ever did. I think that I know it's one that you are interested in. I wondered if what your reflections on, I mean, the fact that you're telling a story that's 100 years old. Do you think that's is that an appropriate thing to do?
Yeah.
When you're asking people to tell a story.
Yeah, I mean, they're telling their own story as well as the story of the Gas Girls. They're kind of raising the dead, but in terms of, you know, all the Gas Girls sort of died early, as your research showed, because of the dangerous working conditions and unregulated working conditions they worked under. But also it was 100 years ago, so, you know, it might be difficult to get anybody through from that time. I mean, you worked with a fragment of living memory that a Gas Girl passed down to her grandson, and then there were other fragments as well, that you had, like the image sort of story, the historical kind of images that you had, and stories about like the deserter who was shot, and Captain Roberts, the doctor who worked alongside the factory. So you had snippets of information, and then what was really interesting was that this group of people, a group that you'd brought together from 3 different groups. So you had advanced, experienced actor community members, and then sort of people who'd come through youth theatre, and a kind of more adult group, all come together and put flesh and voice to the Gas Girls. So and it's quite a critical project, quite a critical play. It's not at all you know, heritage nostalgia that often people say community theatre is, although, you know, that's really debatable. I mean, it's a very you know, what James Thompson might call a difficult return, rather than a play that's restoring some kind of status quo. So, I mean, it looks at how the women were, what would you call it? Just sort of sacrificed, really, by the system, and it kind of, at the end, there is no community. So it's kind of like a movement away from that notion of community as sacrifice towards, you know, more critical notion of community, which I think is important in these times of.
Yeah, I think, and the thing that, I don't know, when I've been making that sort of work, I mean, I love heritage work. I think it's really important to tell untold stories of the past, which do underline sort of the injustice of the times, but also connect to the injustice of the current world we live in. And it, you know, often when people see these sort of shows, they say, well, where did you find that story? That's amazing. I had no idea that happened. And actually that's still happening now, isn't it? And I think that sort of connection is good. I mean, the only place where I, you know, ethically trip myself up is the thing of, well, how hard is it for, you know, you're trying to tell untold stories, but there's such a measure of invention and creative license with that, where you're giving, you know, at acta, we're giving participants the opportunity to create their own characters, create their own scenes, their own dialogue around, which in the end is purely fictitious, but based on research. But I tie myself up on knots on that one.
That's where I think community performance is not heritage nostalgia, but really postmodern, and has a lot in common with contemporary performance, insofar as you quickly realise that memory is, it's imagination and improvisation as much as it is something that refers back to something that might have happened. You know, when we do history, I think, or we do memory, you know, there is an element to it that is very, very much imagination based. And then it's about not the past, but what people are making of the past in the present for the future. So it becomes connected sort of in that kind of long timeline. And I mean, you know, those stories were suppressed because of the Official Secrecy Act that the women and the men who worked in the factories had to sign. And I mean, I think today the Russia report comes out, doesn't it? So
yeah, it's just come out.
Yeah. So you know, I think this is a group of people who are working over some pretty significant and timely issues that they're making. They're you know, there's no direct effect on any of, we can't prove cause and effect in this stuff. I mean, Eugene's book from I think 2013 sort of gave up trying to pinpoint cause and effect in community theatre and just said we should critically look at process, because and if you do, then it's a group of people sort of wrangling with this idea of what happens to ordinary people when they're under this kind of cloak and dagger secrecy stuff, and what governments then get away with doing to people under that. And that's an important lesson to learn, I think.
Do you think that then there's an important role for actor and community theatre in the world of that we currently find ourselves in?
I think so. I mean, you know, community theatre, I think it's an important, I mean, everybody uses that. I don't want to say it, but it's really important. And I think the more people you can bring to it, and the more you can kind of extend its circles of influence, you know, the better will be, which, I mean, it's limited by its scale and the amount of funding, isn't it? But if the more kind of participatory, socially engaged, community-based companies we can have doing stuff, the more hope I have for the world in the end. And sometimes it can do amazing things. If you look at, you know, the work of some companies who do change government policy and have, you know, Indigenous language programs rolled out nationally, or who have the copyright of a famous Indigenous Australian artist restored to the family, so that they can then kind of use that money to invest in, you know, kind of infrastructure that supports communities working in remote areas of Australia producing art that they can, you know, sell, then it does have impact. And in the same way, I think ACTA really works on, you know, the communicating a very strong feeling about things. It's very much, I think, not about changing the world so much, but sensing, you know, where there is inequality or injustice, and coming down quite, you know, having a very strong sense of where that stands.
Yeah,
And comes through the participants.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Lag. No, I was going to say, I think that, yeah, there is that underlying feeling of fairness and and equality, I suppose, and inclusion in our work. I mean, it's interesting times we're in. I wonder whether out of the other side of the crisis, we find that there's a more, you know, that more investment is put into this area of work, that this, you know, the challenges that are being faced by the arts. I think that the value for money in participatory and community arts is of a high standard.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, Kerrie, thank you so much for your conversation this morning. Really love to talk to you as ever. There are more of these conversations coming up. I'm going to be talking to Hiba, who's one of our foundation students, and now an actor associate, and some long-term actor participants and other associates. Those are coming up over the next few weeks. But thanks very much, Kerrie, for your time this morning. And just
You're welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Not at all. It was our delight. And I'll see you soon. Thanks very much.
Okay.